The day I found out I had inherited $2.3 million from my father, I was standing in a notary's office in downtown Ottawa, wearing a coat that still had a coffee stain on the sleeve from that morning. I hadn't had time to change. I'd driven straight from the hospital after a 12-hour shift, still half numb from grief, still running on whatever autopilot kicks in when you've been crying in parking lots for 3 days straight. My father had passed 11 days earlier. A stroke. Fast, the doctor said, like that was supposed to be a comfort. I work as a registered nurse at the Civic Hospital. I've been there for 9 years. My husband, Scott, is a commercial real estate developer. We met at a friend's wedding when I was 29, got married 2 years later, and for a long time, a genuinely long time, I thought we had a good thing. Not perfect, but real. The notary's name was Gail. Late 50s, reading glasses on a chain around her neck, the kind of woman who has seen everything and reacts to none of it. She pulled up my file on her screen, then my father's estate documentation, then cross-referenced something I didn't catch, and her face did this thing. Just a slight pause. The kind professionals do when they're recalibrating. And she said, "Before we proceed, I need to confirm your marital status. According to what I'm seeing here, there's a divorce decree registered under your name, filed and finalized. About 8 weeks ago." I looked at her. She looked at me. I said, "I'm sorry?" She turned the monitor toward me. My name, Scott's name, a court file number, a date. I counted to 5 inside my head. I don't know why. Some reflex I didn't know I had. 5 seconds of complete stillness while my brain tried to process what my eyes were reading. Then I said, very quietly, "Can I get a copy of that? I need to back up." My father's name was Raymond. He worked as a civil engineer for 37 years, lived in the same house in Canada that he and my mother bought in 1987, drove a 14-year-old Subaru that he refused to replace because it still ran fine, and spent his retirement growing tomatoes and arguing with his neighbor about property lines in a way that was mostly good-natured. He was not a man anyone would have described as wealthy. What I didn't know, what none of us knew, not even my brother Patrick, was that Raymond had quietly, methodically, over decades, built up a portfolio of GICs, index funds, and a small rental property in Gatineau that he'd purchased in 2003 and never mentioned. His financial advisor, a man named Doug, who'd known my dad since the 90s, called me 2 days after the funeral and said he needed to walk me through the estate. $2.3 million, split equally between Patrick and me. My share, just over $1 million after taxes and fees. I sat in my car outside Doug's office for 20 minutes before I could drive. Scott didn't know yet. I hadn't told him. Not because I was hiding it, I was just still absorbing it myself. We'd had a rough few months. He'd been stressed about a development project in Barhaven that was over budget and behind schedule, and I'd been quietly exhausted from grief and night shifts and trying to hold everything together. We weren't fighting, exactly. We were just orbiting each other. Two people living parallel lives in the same house. I'd planned to tell him that evening. Over dinner, something that felt right. Instead, I was standing in a notary's office learning that 8 weeks ago, someone had filed a divorce decree in my name, and apparently it had been processed and finalized, and I had had absolutely no idea. Gail gave me the copies. She was professional about it. Calm, no drama, just handed me the papers and said she'd need to pause our estate filing until the marital status discrepancy was clarified. She suggested I contact a family lawyer before doing anything else. I drove home in a kind of suspended unreality. I called my friend Donna from the hospital parking lot. Donna is an ER physician and possibly the most unflappable person I know. She once talked a man down from a ledge while eating a granola bar. I told her what Gail had said. There was a pause. "Don't go home yet," Donna said. "Don't say anything to Scott. Come here first." I went to Donna's apartment. She poured me a glass of wine I didn't drink and sat across from me at her kitchen table while I laid out the papers. We looked at them together. My signature was on the divorce petition, or something that looked like my signature. Donna is not a handwriting expert, but she held the paper up next to a card I had in my wallet, a loyalty card I'd signed years ago, and said, "That's not quite right, is it?" It wasn't. Close, but not right. Someone had filed for divorce on my behalf, signed my name, and the paperwork had gone through without me ever appearing in court or receiving formal notice at my home address. The notification, we later found out, had been sent to an address I'd never heard of, an apartment on Merivale Road that apparently, according to public records, was rented under a name I also didn't recognize. I went home that night and I was very, very calm. Scott was in the kitchen reheating pasta when I walked in. He asked how the notary appointment went. I said it was fine, just some paperwork to sort through. He nodded and turned back to the stove, and I watched him and thought, he doesn't look like a man who knows his wife just found out she's been divorced for 2 months without her knowledge. But then again, what does that look like? I ate dinner. I asked about his project in Barhaven. He complained about the contractor. I listened. Then I went upstairs and called a lawyer. Her name was Andrea. A colleague of Donna's husband had recommended her. Family law, but with a background in fraud. When I described the situation over the phone at 11:30 that night, she was quiet for a moment, then said, "Can you come in tomorrow morning?" I rearranged my shift. I went. Andrea was direct in the way that good lawyers are. No softening, no hedging, just information delivered cleanly. She told me that what I was describing, if accurate, constituted identity fraud and potentially forgery. The divorce, while technically on file, would likely be contestable given the circumstances. But first, she needed to understand why. "Walk me through your finances," she said. "Joint accounts, property, insurance. Anything that would be affected by a change in marital status." I walked her through it. The joint account we used for household expenses. The mortgage on the house in Westboro, which we'd bought together 6 years ago. Scott's business, which he'd incorporated shortly after we got married, and in which I had no formal role but had, over the years, invested just over $80,000 of my own savings as an informal loan we'd never properly documented. Andrea wrote everything down. Then she said, "And your father's estate. He passed recently? 11 days ago. And the estate value," I told her. She put down her pens. "Okay," she said. "I think I understand the timing." She explained it slowly, and I sat there and let the pieces fall into place like something heavy dropping through ice. If Scott had filed the divorce before my father died, before anyone knew about the estate, then, legally, as of the date of finalization, I was single. Anything inherited after that date was mine alone, not subject to division. But more importantly, if I had remained married to Scott and then discovered the inheritance, it would have become a significant marital asset, potentially subject to equalization under Ontario family property law. "He didn't know about the inheritance," I said. "Almost certainly not," Andrea said. "But he may have anticipated that your father was ill and acted on something else." "Is there any reason?" "Financial pressure, another relationship, anything that would have motivated him to want out of the marriage quietly." I thought about it. I thought about the Barhaven project, the contractor complaints, the stress he'd been carrying for months. "There's a woman," I said. I heard myself say it and realized I'd known for a while without letting myself know. Her name was Christy. She worked in Scott's office. I'd met her twice at company events. Early 30s, sharp, the kind of person who laughs at your husband's jokes a half second before anyone else does. I hadn't let myself think about it too carefully. "Do you have any documentation?" Andrea asked. I didn't, not yet. "Then here's what we're going to do," she said. And she looked at me steadily. "We are going to let Scott believe that nothing has changed. You're going to go home, and you're going to be exactly the same as you always are. You're not going to tell him about the estate, and you're not going to indicate in any way that you know about the divorce. Do you understand?" I nodded. "This is important," she said. "If he knows you've found out, things will move fast and not in your favor. Right now, you have the advantage of information. Don't give it up." I drove home and I made a grocery list and I did a load of laundry. And I went to bed beside a man who had filed for divorce without my knowledge. And I stared at the ceiling and breathed slowly and thought about my father growing tomatoes in his backyard. And I did not say one word. The next 3 weeks were the strangest of my life. I went to work. I came home. I made dinner. I asked about the Barhaven project. I listened. I did everything I always did, except that I was also quietly doing other things. Andrea retained a forensic document examiner, who confirmed within 10 days that the signature on the divorce petition was not mine. She filed an application to have the divorce set aside on the grounds of fraud and lack of proper notice. In the meantime, I contacted Doug, my father's financial advisor, and asked him to help me transfer my inheritance into an account Scott had no knowledge of or access to. Doug, who had known my father for 30 years and was the kind of man who had very strong feelings about doing things properly, did not ask unnecessary questions. I also, on Andrea's advice, hired a private investigator. His name was Gary, and he was a former RCMP officer who now worked out of a small office in Nepean and drove a completely unremarkable gray Civic. Gary confirmed within 1 week that Scott and Christy had been in a relationship for approximately 14 months. He also confirmed that they had been spending time at an apartment on Merivale Road, the same address on the fake divorce papers. I sat with that for a day. Then I called Andrea. He filed from her address, I said. That's consistent with what we suspected, she said. It gave them a way to receive and intercept any correspondence related to the proceedings. How did the court not catch this? Uncontested divorce proceedings in Ontario don't require a court appearance if the paperwork is in order. The system assumed the paperwork was in order. I thought about the word assumed. I thought about how much of our lives runs on assumption. That the person sleeping next to you is who you think they are, that the documents with your name on them were actually signed by you, that the ground beneath your feet is solid. What happens next? I asked. That depends on what you want, Andrea said. We can move quickly, or we can wait. There's a hearing coming up. Scott's project, the Barhaven development, is he presenting to investors? He was. I knew about it because he'd mentioned it twice at dinner, distracted, running through talking points under his breath. A significant financing meeting. Several major investors, his business partner, a man named Greg, and 2 institutional lenders who were deciding whether to continue funding the project. Yes, I said. Next, Thursday, then wait until Friday, Andrea said. On Wednesday, something shifted. I came home from a late shift to find Scott on the phone in the kitchen, speaking quietly, turned away from the door. He hung up when he heard me. He smiled. He said he'd saved me some of the risotto from dinner. I thanked him and ate it standing at the counter, and I thought, 14 months. 14 months of this. Of me working nights and grieving my father and trying to hold the shape of a marriage together while he was building a completely different life 2 kilometers away on Merivale Road. I went upstairs and I sat on the edge of the bed and I let myself feel it. Really feel it. For about 20 minutes. The anger. The grief. Not for the marriage exactly, because I could see now, with terrible clarity, that the marriage I'd thought I had wasn't quite what it was. The grief was for the version of my life I'd believed in. The one where I was building something real with someone who chose me back. Then I washed my face, and I went to bed, and I slept better than I had in weeks. Friday morning, I called in a personal day. By then, Andrea had the court order reinstating my marital status. The fraudulent divorce had been set aside. She had also, working with a forensic accountant she trusted, identified something I hadn't been looking for. In the 8 months leading up to the fake divorce filing, Scott had transferred $47,000 from our joint account, in increments small enough not to trigger automatic alerts. The money had gone into an account I couldn't trace directly, but the pattern was clear. I also found out, through Gary, that Christie was listed as a silent partner in a numbered corporation that had received 2 consulting payments from Scott's development company in the past year. The amounts, $18,500 and $22,000, for services that, as far as anyone could tell, had never been rendered. I forwarded everything to Andrea. She forwarded the relevant portions to an RCMP financial crimes contact she had worked with before. Then I got dressed, drove downtown, and walked into the offices of Bennett plus Hale, the commercial real estate firm, where Scott's financing meeting had taken place the previous day. His business partner Greg was in the lobby when I arrived. He looked surprised to see me. We'd met a handful of times over the years. Scott's work events, a Christmas party once. He was a decent man, I thought. A little oblivious, but decent. Is Scott here? I asked. He stepped out, but he'll be back in about. That's okay, I said. I actually wanted to speak with you. We sat in a small boardroom. I put Andrea's summary document on the table. I told Greg everything. Calmly, in order, starting with the notary's office and ending with the numbered corporation. Greg didn't say anything for a long moment. He looked at the document. He looked at me. How long have you known? He said. About 3 weeks. He put his hand over his mouth briefly. Then he said, the financing from Thursday. If this is accurate, if there are fraudulent transfers going through the company accounts, the lenders will pull out. I know, I said. This could take down the whole Barhaven project. Ah. I know that too. Why are you coming to me with this and not? Because you're his business partner and you have a right to know before your lenders find out through other channels, I said. And they will find out. And they will find out. The file is already with financial crimes. Greg nodded slowly. He was very quiet. I left the document with him and I drove home. Scott called at 2:14 in the afternoon. I let it ring. He called again at 2:31. I picked up. We need to talk, he said. His voice was doing something I hadn't heard before. A controlled kind of panic. Like a man who is trying very hard not to sound like what he is. Okay, I said. Can you come to the office? I'd rather not, I said. You can come here. He arrived 40 minutes later. He came in through the front door. His key still worked, because legally we were still married, and he found me sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea and my phone face up in front of me, recording. He sat down across from me. I waited. What did you tell Greg? He said. The truth, I said. You had no right to go to my business partner without… Scott, I said. I found out about the divorce 7 weeks after it was finalized. The one that was filed using a forged copy of my signature from an apartment rented in someone else's name. I think we can put aside the question of what I had a right to do. He went very still. I watched him recalibrate. I watched him decide that outrage wasn't going to work and shift to something else. Something quieter, more careful. Isabel, he said, my name. First time he'd said it in the last 10 minutes. I made mistakes, I know that. But if you'd just let me explain. I've been letting you explain for 3 weeks, I said. Without you knowing I was listening. Another stillness. The transfers, he said finally. All documented, I said. Andrea has everything. So does Greg now. And an RCMP Financial Crimes Unit received a file yesterday morning. He looked at the table. He looked at his hands. Something crossed his face that I couldn't quite name. Not remorse, exactly. More like the specific exhaustion of a person who has been maintaining a lie for a long time and has finally run out of energy for it. What do you want? He said. My $80,000 back, I said, with interest. A clean separation of all joint assets supervised by both our lawyers. And I want my name on the house removed cleanly. You can keep it or sell it, I don't care. But I want out of it within 90 days. He looked up. That's it? That's what I want from you. I said. What happens with the RCMP file isn't mind control anymore. He left an hour later. He didn't take anything with him. He just walked out the front door and got in his car and drove away. And I sat in the kitchen for a while longer, finishing my tea, listening to the house. My brother Patrick came over that evening. I'd called him after Scott left. He drove in from Gloucester with a box of butter tarts from our dad's favorite bakery. This place in Bell's Corners that my father had been going to since the 80s. And he sat at my kitchen table and listened while I talked for almost 2 hours. At the end, he said, Dad would have hated this guy. Dad did hate this guy, I said. He just never said it out loud. Patrick laughed, and then I laughed, and it felt like the first real thing I'd felt in a long time. In the months that followed, the Barhaven project collapsed. The institutional lenders withdrew after the RCMP investigation became public through a court filing. Scott's business partner Greg restructured the company without him. The numbered corporation connected to Christie was flagged for a separate audit. Scott eventually agreed to all my terms. My $80,000 came back, with interest, as part of the formal separation agreement. The house sold in the spring. Andrea was thorough and unrelenting in a way that I remain genuinely grateful for. I moved into a 2-bedroom apartment in Hintonburg, which has a small balcony where I'm growing tomatoes this summer for the first time in my life. My dad's old Subaru is in the parking garage downstairs. Patrick helped me transport it after we dealt with the estate. It still runs fine. The inheritance, my share, the full $1 million after taxes, is sitting in a properly structured account now. And I have a financial advisor named Doug who has very strong opinions about index funds and who I trust completely because he trusted my father for 30 years. I'm back to full-time shifts at the Civic. My colleagues there don't know most of this. That's fine. Some things you carry quietly for a while, not because you're ashamed, but because they're still yours. There's a woman I've started having coffee with, someone I met through Donna, and she asked me last month what the hardest part was. Not of the divorce or the fraud or any of the logistics. The hardest part, she said. The actual hardest thing. I thought about it. The 5 seconds, I said. She looked at me. In the notary's office, I said, when Gail showed me the monitor and I counted to 5 before I said anything. That was the moment I had to decide what kind of person I was going to be about it. And I think I got it right. But it was 5 seconds. It could have gone the other way. She nodded slowly. What would the other way have looked like? I thought about Scott in the kitchen, reheating pasta. I thought about my father's tomatoes, and his ancient Subaru, and the 37 years he spent quietly building something solid without making a production of it. I don't know, I said. But I didn't go there. And I think that's the whole story, really. Not the money, not the fraud, not the lawyers or the RCMP file, or any of it. Just 5 seconds in a notary's office in Ottawa, in a coat with a coffee stain on the sleeve, deciding to be still long enough to think clearly. That's the part I'd tell my dad about, if I could. he would have understood it completely.